Well, here I am with egg on my face because I said that Chamber of Secrets is probably the best adaptation, but I am having to eat my words. I can admit when I'm wrong, and this is not a good adaptation. I'm going to break a cardinal rule of algorithm dealing with in article writing, and I'm just going to tell you up front why this one fails so badly. Because while I can admit that I'm wrong, I also think that I'm really interesting, and you'll stick with me anyway because I like to walk the tightrope between delusional and hopeful. Also in my Azkaban rant, I said that the biggest problem with all of these movies is that the books they're based on are mysteries, and they utterly fail at being mysteries. And this is one of the worst offenders because of the kind of mystery that it is. You see, Philosopher's Stone, suck it Arthur, was a what's going on mystery. It's the kind of mystery that's used to get people engaged through progressive questions. Why is this hallway off limits? Something's being hidden there. What's being hidden there? The Philosopher's Stone. Why is the Philosopher's Stone being hidden? Someone's trying to steal it. Who is trying to steal it? Voldemort. Who's helping him? Quirrell. And over all of that is the constant question of why did Voldemort want to kill Harry, and why did he fail? All these are engaging questions to keep the reader reading. But Chamber is unique because it's a whodunit. The mystery both is the point and is the story. Someone is killing mudbloods. It's okay to say made-up slurs, right? And we want to know who and how. That Agatha Christie style mystery is the book's genre, just in a fantasy setting. And the movie completely fails at it, to the point that it's ridiculous. Yes, like Philosopher's Stone, there are a lot of changes made that make the movie boring when it didn't have to be, and I will get to those. They are what I was prepared to write about, but that is much less important compared to failing at telling the story. You had one job, Steve! You see, like any good whodunit, there are clues in the book to help the reader figure out the mystery. But, and I swear this is true, all but one of them are left out. All but one! But before I get into that, I will give some credit where it is due. John Williams is incredible as always. Jason Isaacs was an inspired casting choice. I haven't seen any interviews or anything, but it does seem like he kind of based his performance on doing an older, more disciplined, and slightly more mature version of Tom Felton's performance, which really sells him as father and son. Kenneth Branagh manages to give a very different performance from Lockhart in the book, but it's just so awesome that you do not care. The sequence where the spiders chase the car is one of the most exciting sequences in the entire series, and this transition is as smooth as butter. It's like a magic trick. And I really like Tom Riddle's actor in this one. I don't think he's really done anything else. This is one of Radcliffe's best moments in the first two movies.
Let us hope that Mr. Potter will always be around to save the day.
Don't worry. I will be.
The memory had faded a little bit, but Richard Harris was so good. I have heard some people argue that they don't think he could pull off powerful Dumbledore, but that's not really the version of Dumbledore that we want in the first 2 or 3 books. And you can't make any argument that Michael Gambon did pull that off, and he utterly failed at comforting Dumbledore, which Richard Harris was fantastic at. So the score is at least 1-0. Well, anyway, on to business. As a recap, the Chamber of Secrets has a basilisk in it for killing mudbloods. Voldemort opened it when he was a student, but decided to stop using it so he didn't have to spend summer break in an orphanage. You know, just very altruistic guy. He stored his memories in a diary on the off chance that he could influence someone else to open it later. That person happened to be Ginny Weasley, and the book gives you ample clues to that fact that jump out at you when you reread it. The movie, again, has one. The first mention that we get of anything, and I love how insanely subtle it is the Weasley family is leaving in a hurry, but Ginny forgot her diary, and they have to turn back. They had almost reached the highway when Ginny shrieked that she'd left her diary. By the time she had clambered back into the car, they were running very late, and tempers were running high. Now you might say that that isn't a hint, but you're wrong. It's a hint by association, because there are only 2 diaries mentioned in the entire book, Ginny's and Tom Riddle's. They happen to be the same one, but there's a natural connection in your brain between the two due to that scarcity of them being the only ones in existence. Moving on, throughout the book, several characters and descriptions say that Ginny looks ill. Nothing has happened yet, but that's called foreshadowing. We later learn that that was the sign of Riddle's growing influence on her, but in the meantime, all we know is that she hasn't looked ill before, so something is up with Ginny. Mystery Solving 101. When a character is repeatedly mentioned as having something wrong with them, you should pay attention. attention. Now, you may say that you didn't have a hint that the journal was to blame, but you have to keep some things back from the audience so there's no mystery. Next, after the first chamber attack, there's a brief mention of Ginny being very upset about the whole situation. Ginny Weasley seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. Again, it's really subtle, but she's the only individual outside of the main three that we're told is upset about the situation, which is a red flag. Particularly because she doesn't hang out with the trio, so there's no real reason to bring it up other than as a clue. Then, a big plot point comes in later when it's revealed that Myrtle was killed by the basilisk last time, which leads them to conclude that maybe the Chamber of Secrets entrance is in her bathroom. But in the book, we also learn that Mrs. Norris was petrified next to Myrtle's bathroom real soon after the petrification happens. It was about here, said Ron, recovering himself to walk a few paces past Filch's chair and pointing. Level with this door. He reached for the brass doorknob, but suddenly withdrew his hand as though he'd been burned. What's the matter? Said Harry. Can't go in there, said Ron gruffly. That's a girl's toilet. Oh, Ron, there won't be anyone in there, said Hermione, standing up and coming over. That's Moaning Myrtle's place. Come on, let's have a look. That's actually a pretty clever clue to give right off the bat. Next, just 2 pages later, it's reiterated that Ginny is really upset. That's what I told Ginny, said Percy fiercely. But she still seems to think that you're going to be expelled. I've never seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You might think of her. All the first years are thoroughly overexcited by this business. Then we get our first hint at the true identity of the heir of Slytherin. But Albus, surely... Who? The question is not who, said Dumbledore, his eyes on Cullen. The question is how. I definitely kind of skipped past that when I was a kid because I missed the implication that Dumbledore knows who did it. First hint that it was Voldemort. You know, the Wizarding World's just constant specter. That one's absence is a little extra baffling because the scene is in the movie. They just stop 2 lines before the information. Again, it's mentioned that Ginny is upset about Colin. Ginny Weasley, who sat next to Colin Creevey in Charms, was distraught, but Harry felt that Fred and George were going the wrong way about cheering her up. I know that things like that don't feel like much, but Rowling specifically mentions again and again that Ginny is upset about the victim in an attack while everyone else is just upset about the attack itself. Now, I do like the inclusion of the water trail when Harry finds Justin and Nick. It's a rare, nice touch in these first 2 movies. Actually, that's not fair. The art department in the first 2 movies was on point. Then we finally get our first clue about the monster itself. All right, Harry, he said, pulling out the balaclava so he could speak. Why are you in class? Cancelled, said Harry, getting up. What are you doing in here? Hagrid held up the limp rooster. Second one killed this term, he explained. It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around the hen coop. You have to actually know a good bit about mythical monsters for this to be a clue, because rooster crows being fatal to a basilisk is part of their mythos. Spiders and the petrification don't count as hints because they aren't actually part of it, but I do like their inclusion. The basilisk's indirect gaze not killing but petrifying has a certain logic to it, and Rowling has never said why she included the fact that spiders are terrified of them, but the going fan theory is that spiders' eyes are arranged so that they have a 360-degree view, and some of those eyes have no lids and can't be closed, meaning that something that kills you by looking at your eyes is a particular danger to them. Anyway, the roosters being killed is a hint, and they did include 2 brief shots of Hagrid holding a dead rooster, but it honestly feels like something Hagrid would do under normal circumstances. There was a filmed scene where Hagrid explains it, but they cut that. Next, after Ginny tries to ditch the diary and Harry finds it, we have this scene. Harry, glancing over, saw Malfoy stoop and snatch up something. Leering, he showed it to Crabbe and Goyle, and Harry realized that he got Riddle's diary. Give that back, said Harry quietly. Wonder what Potter's written in this, said Malfoy, who obviously hadn't noticed the year-only cover and thought he had Harry's own diary. A hush fell over the onlookers. Ginny was staring from the diary to Harry, looking terrified. We are no longer being subtle. That's one that smacks you in the head on a reread. Then another hint about the true culprit is one of those great clues hidden in plain sight. The creature that was lurking in the castle, he thought, sounded like a sort of monster Voldemort. Even other monsters didn't want to name it. That one's absence was more excusable in my head because it's part of an inner monologue. Finally, just before she's taken into the chamber, Ginny has this scene. Just then, Ginny Weasley came over and sat down next to Ron. She looked tense and nervous, and Harry noticed that her hands were twisting in her lap. What's up? Said Ron, helping himself to more porridge. Ginny didn't say anything, but glanced up and down the Gryffindor table with a scared look on her face that reminded Harry of someone, but he couldn't think who. Spit it out, said Ron, watching her. Harry suddenly realized who Ginny looked like. She was rocking backward and forward slightly in her chair, exactly like Dobby did when he was teetering on the edge of revealing forbidden information. I've come to tell you something, Ginny mumbled, carefully looking at Harry. What is it? Said Harry. Ginny looked as though she couldn't find the right words. What? Said Ron. Ginny opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Harry leaned forward and spoke quietly so that only Ginny and Ron could hear him. Is it something about the Chamber of Secrets? Have you seen something? Someone acting oddly? Ginny drew a deep breath, and at that precise moment, Percy Weasley appeared, looking tired and wan. Why would Ginny know anything about the Chamber of Secrets unless she was involved with the Chamber of Secrets? Those are all the big clues that I caught, and it's possible that I missed some of the smaller ones. There is, of course, the whole voice only Harry the Parseltongue can hear, but that one was in the movie. And it's the only one in the movie. I just cannot reiterate that enough. Why didn't they include any of that? There are no hints about anything but that the monster is a snake. These little shots of Ginny are the closest that we get to a clue that she's involved. And if you want to try and argue that that was a valid hint, you are the worst kind of fanboy. So that's all the reasons why the mystery falls flat on its face. Let's move on to the boring stuff. Again, the very first chapter. Page 5, in fact. The Dursleys are hosting a business dinner and going over their plans.
I think we should run through the schedule one more time, said Uncle Vernon. We should all be in position at 8 o'clock. Petunia, you will be
in the lounge, said Aunt Petunia promptly, waiting to welcome them graciously to our home.
Good, good. And Dudley?
I'll be waiting by the door. Dudley put on a foul, simpering smile. May I take your coats, Mr. and Mrs. Mason? They'll love him, cried Aunt Petunia rapturously.
Excellent, Dudley,
said Uncle Vernon. Then he rounded on Harry.
And you?
I'll be in my room, making no noise and pretending I'm not there, said Harry tonelessly.
Exactly,
said Uncle Vernon nastily.
I will lead them into the lounge, introduce you, Petunia, and pour them drinks. At 8:15...
I'll announce dinner, said Aunt Petunia.
And Dudley, you'll say,
May I take you through to the dining room, Mrs. Mason? said Dudley, offering his fat arm to an invisible woman. My perfect little gentleman, sniffed Aunt Petunia.
And you?
said Uncle Vernon viciously to Harry. I'll be in my room, making no noise and pretending I'm not there, said Harry Dudley.
Precisely. Now, we should aim to get in a few good compliments at dinner. Petunia, any ideas?
Vernon tells me you're a wonderful golfer, Mr. Mason. Do tell me where you bought your dress, Mrs. Mason.
Perfect. Dudley?
How about... We had to write an essay about our hero at school, Mr. Mason, and I wrote about you. This was too much for both Aunt Petunia and Harry. Aunt Petunia burst into tears and hugged her son while Harry ducked under the table so they wouldn't see him laughing.
And you, boy?
Harry fought to keep his face straight as he emerged. I'll be in my room making no noise and pretending I'm not there, he said.
Too right you will, said Uncle Vernon forcefully. The Masons don't know anything about you, and it's going to stay that way.
Movie comparison.
Now, let's go over our schedule once again, shall we? Petunia, when the Masons arrive, you will be...
in the lounge, waiting to welcome them graciously to our home.
Good. And Dudley, you will be...
I'll be waiting to open the door.
Excellent. And you?
I'll be in my bedroom, making no noise and pretending that I don't exist.
Yes, it's a good bit longer, but here's the thing about length. Length is only bad when the movie feels long. That would have added maybe 2 minutes, but it's a really entertaining 2 minutes, so the audience wouldn't care. And removing this shot would probably take a whole minute out of the runtime. So then you're only adding 1 minute, technically. Moving forward a decent bit, this is the end of Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy's first interaction in the movie.
Associating with muggles. I thought your family could sink no lower. I'll see you at work.
Here's the book. We have a very different idea of what disgraces the name of Wizard Malfoy, he said. Clearly, said Mr. Malfoy, his pale eyes straying to Mr. and Mrs. Granger, who were watching apprehensively. The company you keep, Weasley, and I thought your family could sink no lower. There was a thud of metal as Ginny's cauldron went flying. Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Mr. Malfoy, knocking him backward into a bookshelf. Dozens of heavy spell books came thundering down on all their heads. There was a yell of, "Get him, Dad!" from Fred and George. Mrs. Weasley was shrieking, "No, Arthur, no!" The crowd stampeded backward, knocking more shelves over. "Gentlemen, please, please!" cried the assistant, and then louder than all, "Break it up there, gents, break it up!" Hagrid was wading toward them through the sea of books. In an instant, he had pulled Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy apart. Mr. Weasley had a cut lip, and Mr. Malfoy had been hit in the eye by an encyclopedia of toadstools. He was still holding Ginny's old Transfiguration book. He thrust it at her, his eyes glittering with malice. "Here, girl, take your book. It's the best your father can give you." Pulling himself out of Hagrid's grip, he beckoned to Draco and swept from the shop. Mrs. Weasley's Howler gets a mention here as well. Now, I'm not going to show the full scene, just a couple of moments, and then show how the book describes it.
Oh no! Look, everyone, Weasley's got himself a howler.
Go on, Ron. I ignored one from my gran once. It was horrible.
Ronald Weasley! I am absolutely disgusted! Entirely your fault!
Errol, said Ron, pulling the bedraggled owl out by the feet. Errol slumped, unconscious, onto the table, his legs in the air and a damp red envelope in his beak. "Oh, no," Ron gasped. "It's all right. He's still alive," said Hermione, prodding Errol gently with the tip of her finger. "It's not that. It's that." Ron was pointing at the red envelope. It looked quite ordinary to Harry, but Ron and Neville were both looking at it as though they expected it to explode. "What's the matter?" said Harry. She sent me a howler," said Ron faintly. "You'd better open it, Ron," said Neville in a timid whisper. "It'll be worse if you don't. My gran sent me one once, and I ignored it, and it was horrible." Harry looked from their petrified faces to the red envelope. "What's a howler?" he said. But Ron's whole attention was fixed on the letter, which had begun to smoke at the corners. "Open it," Neville urged. "It'll be over in a few minutes." Ron stretched out a shaking hand, eased the envelope from Errol's beak, and slid it open. Neville stuffed his fingers in his ears. A split second later, Harry knew why. He thought for a moment it had exploded. A roar of sound filled the huge hall, shaking dust from the ceiling. "Still in the car! I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd expelled you!" Mrs. Weasley's yells, 100 times louder than usual, made the plates and spoons rattle on the table and echoed deafeningly off the stone walls. People throughout the hall were swiveling around to see who had received the howler, and Ron sank so low in his chair that only his crimson forehead could be seen. "You and Harry could have both died!" Harry had been wondering when his name was going to crop up. He tried very hard to look as though he couldn't hear the voice that was making his eardrums throb. "Absolutely disgusted!" A ringing silence fell. The red envelope, which had dropped from Ron's hand, burst into flames and curled into ashes. Harry and Ron sat stunned as though a tidal wave had just passed over them. A few people laughed, and gradually a babble of talk broke out again. All of the buildup is gone, and the howler itself is frankly underwhelming. And honestly, that's a combination of just the lack of any kind of build-up and wonder about what the thing is, the visuals because no one reacts to that thing, the sound editing because it sounds less booming than Mrs. Weasley's normal voice, and then there was also one more thing that really struck me after this reread and rewatch. Guys, Julie Walters is terrible as Mrs. Weasley. When we first meet her in the book, she is marching across her yard on the warpath, and then she lays into Fred, George, and Ron, and they are all terrified of her despite being taller than her. In the movies, no one looks cowed by her at all, and you really don't blame them. There is nothing intimidating about this woman at all. She's great as the motherly character, but anytime she has to be domineering, it is a complete fail. She comes across more like an older sister trying to sound in charge than a mother who rules her children with an iron fist. I mean, this is how she handles Mr. Weasley when she confronts him about the car in the movie.
"Your sons flew that enchanted car of yours to Surrey and back last night."
"Did you really? How'd it go? I mean, that was very wrong indeed, boys."
And now the book. But the things our lot have taken to enchanting you wouldn't believe. Like cars, for instance. Mrs. Weasley had appeared, holding a long poker like a sword. Mr. Weasley's eyes jerked open. He stared guiltily at his wife. "Cars, Molly dear?" "Yes, Arthur. Cars," said Mrs. Weasley, her eyes flashing. "Imagine a wizard buying a rusty old car and telling his wife all he wanted to do with it was to take it apart to see how it worked, while really he was enchanting it to make it fly." My Mrs. Weasley's pretty bad too. I'm sorry, guys. Mr. Weasley blinked. "Well, dear, I think you'll find that he would be quite within the law to do that, even if he maybe would have done better to tell his wife the truth. There's a loophole in the law, you'll find. As long as he wasn't intending to fly the car, the fact that the car could fly when... Arthur Weasley! You made sure there was a loophole when you wrote that law," shouted Mrs. Weasley, "just so you could carry on tinkering with all that muggle rubbish in your shed. And for your information, Harry arrived this morning in the car you weren't intending to fly." "Harry?" said Mr. Weasley blankly. "Harry who?" He looked around, saw Harry, and jumped. "Good Lord, is it Harry Potter? Very pleased to meet you. Ron's told us so much about... Your sons flew that car to Harry's house and back last night," shouted Mrs. Weasley. "What have you got to say about that, huh?" "Did you really?" said Mr. Weasley eagerly.
Did it go all right? I mean, he faltered as sparks flew from Mrs. Weasley's eyes. That was very wrong, boys. Very wrong indeed.
Julie Waters' entire body language is off. She was not right for this role, and it's even more apparent when all we have is her voice in Howler form because she sounds weak and tinny, and the yelling comes off as petulant rather than authoritative. And it's a shame because Arthur Weasley's actor, Mark Williams, could have played off of the real version of Mrs. Weasley really well. It's the first large misstep in casting, which makes it a lot more noticeable. Moving on is the worst terrible argument possibly in the whole series.
You see, Weasley, unlike some, my father can afford the best. At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in. They got in on pure talent.
No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood. You'll pay for that one, Malfoy. Eat slugs!
I've frequently said after the movie clips, that seems fine. This does not. Even if you don't know how it's written in the book, you know that that is a terrible scene. Forget arguments. I don't know if Chris Columbus has ever seen a child before. Could we please have someone, somewhere, interrupt anyone? Once your attention is drawn to it, you start to notice it everywhere, not just arguments. There is so much space between lines all the time. But what's crazy is that I notice that the pacing between lines is better when the actors are in the same shot, meaning that the actors had a better sense of when to start talking than Columbus did in the editing room. Now, with all of that already against it, let's read what's supposed to happen.
Oh, look, said Flint, a field invasion. Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. What's happening? Ron asked Harry. Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here? He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robes. I'm the new Slytherin seeker, Weasley, said Malfoy smugly. Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father's bought our team. Ron gaped, open-mouthed at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. Good, aren't they? Said Malfoy smoothly. But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms, too. You could raffle off those clean sweep 5s. I expect a museum would bid for them. The Slytherin team howled with laughter. At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in, said Hermione sharply. They got in on pure talent. The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood, he spat. Harry knew at once that Malfoy had said something really bad, because there was an instant uproar at his words. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, How dare you! And Ron plunged his hands into his robes, pulled out his wand, yelling, You'll pay for that one, Malfoy, and pointed furiously under Flint's arm at Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed around the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backward onto the grass.
I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I'm a little mad. Moving on from that is a real quick one, just how we learn that Ron is scared of spiders.
I've never seen spiders act like that.
I don't like spiders.
Versus,
Have you ever seen spiders act like that? Said Hermione wonderingly. No, said Harry. Have you, Ron? Ron? He looked over his shoulder. Ron was standing well back and seemed to be fighting the impulse to run. What's up? Said Harry. I don't like spiders, said Ron tensely. I never knew that, said Hermione, looking at Ron in surprise. You've used spiders in potions loads of times. I don't mind them dead, said Ron, who was carefully looking anywhere but at the window. I just don't like the way they move, Hermione giggled. It's not funny, said Ron fiercely. If you must know, when I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear into a great big filthy spider because I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either if you'd been holding your bear and suddenly it had too many legs. And he broke off, shuddering. Hermione was obviously still trying not to laugh.
One of those is just a statement of fact. The other is an actual display of fear. Alright, so let's look at the Dueling Club. Just the whole scene is bad.
Perhaps it would be prudent to first teach the students to block unfriendly spells, Professor.
An excellent suggestion, Professor Snape. Let's have a volunteer pair. On the count of 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponent. Only to disarm. We don't want any accidents here.
Inverte statue! Rictus Emperor!
I said disarm only!
So first off, Snape says they should show the kids how to block. Lockhart agrees, and then he asks for volunteers. Harry and Malfoy agree, and then they don't teach them anything. And Lockhart tells them to disarm, not block. Which is good since they don't know how to do that. You know how you could fix that? Just don't have the line about blocking. Here's how the book handled that transition.
I think I'd better teach you how to block unfriendly spells, said Lockhart, standing flustered in the midst of the hall. He glanced at Snape, whose black eyes glinted, and looked quickly away. Let's have a volunteer pair. Longbottom and Finch-Fletchley. How about you? A bad idea, Professor. How about Malfoy and Potter? Said Snape with a twisted smile. Excellent idea, said Lockhart, gesturing Harry and Malfoy into the middle of the hall as the crowd backed away to give them room. Now, Harry, said Lockhart, when Draco points his wand at you, you do this. He raised his own wand, attempted a complicated sort of wiggling action, and dropped it. Snape smirked as Lockhart quickly picked it up and said, "Oops, my wand is a little overexcited." Snape moved closer to Malfoy, bit down, and whispered something in his ear. Malfoy smirked too. Harry looked up nervously at Lockhart and said, "Professor, could you show me that blocking thing again?" Lockhart cuffed Harry merrily on the shoulder. "Just do what I did, Harry." "What, drop my wand?" But Lockhart wasn't listening. 3, 2, 1, go! Why did they change that? Then we have this really slow fight between Malfoy and Harry, and only Malfoy and Harry. But the book instead has all the kids break into pairs and then take advantage of the fact that they're allowed to jinx each other and start throwing magic around like crazy. "Stop! Stop!" screamed Lockhart, but Snape took charge. "Venite incantatem," he shouted. Harry's feet stopped dancing. Malfoy stopped laughing, and they were able to look up. A haze of greenish smoke was hovering over the scene. Both Neville and Justin were lying on the floor panting. Ron was holding up an ashen-faced Seamus, apologizing for whatever his broken wand had done, but Hermione and Millicent Bulstrode were still moving. Millicent had Hermione in a headlock, and Hermione was whimpering in pain. Both their wands lay forgotten on the floor. Harry leapt forward and pulled Millicent off. It was difficult. She was a lot bigger than he was. So the entire scene just devolves into chaos that results in Hermione and her partner wrestling each other. Then Lockhart decides to teach them to block, but he fails because he's the absolute worst. Then there's the snake thing, and first of all, this might be my own phobia coming into the mix, but that's a freaking cobra. Why is everyone still standing right next to the platform? I wouldn't be in the room anymore. Possibly not even the castle. I'd become the first student to spontaneously apparate and the first person to manage to get past Hogwarts' block on that spell. I would just blink and suddenly I'm outside Hagrid's hut asking for his crossbow. Moving on, why does this take so long? Harry slowly, very, very slowly approaches the snake. Then says a couple of different phrases to it, and it still doesn't settle down, making the whole scene a little less poignant. And now the book. Harry wasn't sure what made him do it. He wasn't even aware of deciding to do it. All he knew was that his legs were carrying him forward as though he was on casters, and that he had shouted stupidly at the snake, "Leave him alone!" And miraculously, inexplicably, the snake slumped to the floor, docile as a thick black garden hose, its eyes now on Harry. Harry felt the fear drain out of him. He knew the snake wouldn't attack anyone now, though how he knew it he couldn't have explained. I mean, in the movie, what all is he saying there? Book Harry says one thing. Movie Harry says 4 different phrases. What are they? What did he say to it? Next scene, just right after that, we find Justin, the boy that thought Harry was sicking the snake on him. At least you know that if you read the book, but in the movie, this is all we see of him, so most casual viewers probably have no idea who this kid is. But I'm not just complaining about that, because the movie also makes the scene dull. This is so quiet and boring. For the book, I'm going to skip over the peace part because that wouldn't be fair to include. Instead, I'm going to give a suggestion for what could have been done instead, and the movie would be more interesting. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. He could run, and no one would ever know he had been there. But he couldn't just leave them lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he hadn't had anything to do with this? As he stood there, panicking, frantically trying to decide what to do, suddenly the bell rang throughout the entire castle, announcing class was over. Crash, crash, crash! Door after door flew open along the corridor, and people flooded out. For several long minutes, there was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people just kept standing in nearly headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as the teacher shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence and ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat when Ernie the Hufflepuff arrived, panting on the scene. "Caught in the act!" Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. "That will do, Macmillan," said Professor McGonagall sharply. So much more interesting stuff happens. Moving on to Harry and Ron looking for the spiders. I will admit, I think that I like the movie better. It has a better reveal of the danger Harry and Ron are in, but this is still more exciting, so I do have to draw attention to it. Ron didn't speak. He didn't move. His eyes were fixed on a point some 10 feet above the forest floor, right behind Harry. His face was livid with terror. Harry didn't even have time to turn around. There was a loud clicking noise, and suddenly he felt something long and hairy seize him around the middle and lift him off the ground so that he was hanging face down. Struggling, terrified, he heard more clicking and saw Ron's legs leave the ground too, heard Fang whimpering and howling. Next moment he was being swept away into the dark trees. Head hanging, Harry saw what had hold of him was marching on 6 immensely long, hairy legs, the front 2 clutching him tightly below a pair of shining black pincers. Behind him he could hear another of the creatures, no doubt carrying Ron. They were moving into the very heart of the forest. Harry could hear Fang fighting to free himself from a third monster, whining loudly, but Harry couldn't have yelled even if he had wanted to. He seemed to have left his voice back with the car in the clearing. That is more exciting initially, but like I said, I think I prefer the slow reveal of the giant spiders. I do feel the need to share this amusing anecdote. The first time I read this book, something about how my brain interpreted Rowling's description of the giant spiders had me picturing something like a centaur, but instead of a man and a horse, it was a gorilla and a spider. I don't know what made me think it, because it's obviously giant spiders, but that's how I saw it in my head the first time. Maybe something about the arms of the spiders holding the boys did it, and giant furry arms made me think gorilla. I don't know. Does sound like a pretty cool monster though. File away for a D&D campaign. Or a book. You can include that in a book. Cutting forward to the Chamber of Secrets itself, I'm just going to read you everything that Tom says during the fight with the basilisk, and then play everything that he says during the fight in the movie. "Kill him!" "No!" Harry heard Riddle screaming. "Leave the bird! Leave the boy! The boy is behind you! You can still smell him! Kill him! Kill the boy! Leave the bird! The boy is behind you! Sniff! Smell him!"
I have this. Partial tongue won't save you now, Potter. It only obeys me. No! Your bird may have blinded the basilisk, but it can still hear you.
Why was Chris Columbus so against Voldemort yelling at people? Okay, so that's all the boring stuff that I wrote down, and I'm not done with you yet, because I noticed so many things that don't make sense. We are given no explanation at all why the Dursleys aren't scared of Harry. In the book, they are. They treat him like a bomb that could go off at any moment because he hasn't told them that he can't do magic. And we have no reason to assume that he would have done so in the movie, which leads us to wondering why Uncle Vernon suddenly decides that he doesn't want Harry to go back to Hogwarts. In the book, after Dobby destroys the dessert, a letter arrives that tells them that Harry can't do magic. But that letter doesn't appear in the movie. I don't know why they take Ron to Hagrid's after the slug spell. In the book, it happened on the Quidditch grounds, so Hagrid's is the closest place. In the movie, it's in the castle, so Hagrid is farther away than the hospital wing. Hermione knowing what a mudblood is just stupid. She's Muggle-born. She's never heard the phrase before, let alone be upset about it. I know she's a reader, but was she looking at wizard slurs just in case someone called her one? And that continues on to my next complaint. Once you notice it, you get so sick of Hermione explaining things about the wizarding world in the movies. Not like history and spells, but like the normal goings-on. It doesn't bother you in the book because the person who gives those explanations is Ron, the boy born into the wizarding world, who lives in the wizarding world, and is thus familiar with the wizarding world. But for some reasons, the movies have Muggle-born Hermione explaining to him how the world works. We're also never told anything about the people attacked. McGonagall gives the explanation about the monster ridding the school of the not purebloods, so you can infer from that Conan Justin are Muggle-born. But if you haven't read the book, you are very unlikely to guess why Mrs. Norris was attacked, since the movie never mentions Filch's squibness. And speaking of Colin, what the heck is he doing here? The decision to make Polyjuice not affect the voice was
Stupid. The Goblet of Fire book was released before the first movie was in production, so they knew it would break the rules of the world, and it makes no sense why they decided to make that change.
Do you remember me telling you that the Polyjuice potion was only for human transformations?
Nope, Hermione didn't tell us that in the movie. Or in the book. The book got around this by telling us now.
Hermione let her robes fall and Ron backed into the sink. Her face was covered in black fur. Her eyes had turned yellow and there were long, pointed ears poking through her hair.
It was cat hair, she howled. Millicent Bulstrode must have a cat. The potion isn't supposed to be used for animal transformations.
Steve. What possessed you to add that line? And what possessed everybody else to keep it? So in the movie, Harry discovers that the diary talks back, and then he immediately asks if it knows anything about the Chamber of Secrets. I mean, I guess a possible reasoning could be the chamber is open, someone ditched this journal, maybe it's related. But in the book, Ron had detention to clean trophies, and he kept throwing up on Tom's Special Services Award and had to re-clean it repeatedly. So he clearly remembers the name and the year that the award was given. They see the name and know that it's a 50-year-old diary, and the chamber was open 50 years ago. Then Tom leads Harry to asking about the Chamber of Secrets. I'm just going to skip the descriptions on this one, just do the conversation.
Hello, Harry Potter. My name is Tom Riddle. How did you come by my diary? Someone tried to flush it down a toilet. Lucky that I recorded my memories in some more lasting way than ink. But I always knew that there would be those who would not want this diary read. What do you mean? I mean that this diary holds memories of terrible things. Things that were covered up. Things that happened at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. That's where I am now. I'm at Hogwarts and horrible stuff's been happening. Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets?
It's all very logical, but none of that happens in the movie. We don't even know that it happened 50 years ago because that's never said. Instead, Harry is just, this book talks. Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets? It's like he's assuming it's a wizard chat GPT. Aragog just needed one more line about how he knows what the monster is because he tells Harry he lived in a box, but he knows what the monster is. It's just, from my box I could sense its presence and I begged Hagrid to let me go. It's just one line. Alright, so that's all the stuff that I found dumb. Now I just have some general complaints. Nocturne Alley could have been cut completely. It adds nothing to the story at all. It's one of those fan service inclusions with its purpose removed, like Chocolate Frogs or Crookshanks. It doesn't add anything to this movie or its foreshadowing for Book 6. It is kind of cool that both ends of the Vanishing Cabinet are introduced in this book. As well as Katie Bell's necklace, if any of you never noticed that. This just bothers me. What direction was Emma Watson given here?
Harry!
That's not how people greet people. She should have said Harry and then run up to him.
Come on, everyone's been so worried.
And how has everyone been so worried? He's been gone for 2.5 minutes. That was enough time for all of them to go through, find Hermione, tell her what happened, and then start looking for him? Color me skeptical. I really just don't like how the Whomping Willow looks. It looks like a cactus. Its redesign for Prisoner of Azkaban was a good move. Who okayed this delivery from Hagrid?
Harry's got himself a rogue bludger. That's been tampered with, that has.
That's just bad. Also, not a bad delivery. Maggie Smith isn't capable of that. But who okayed this line existing?
I think he's been petrified.
What tipped you off? Him being completely immobile? I'm torn about Ron in the forest. On the one hand, this is when the world realized that Rupert Grint had comedy chops. But the problem is that in this moment, he's so funny that it kind of ruins the tension in the scene. This part is supposed to be really scary and tense, but it's actually one of the funniest parts in the movie.
Well, thank you. We'll just go.
That doesn't include Lockhart, at least. Kenneth Branagh was on fire in this movie.
But if it kills by looking people in the eye, why is it no one's dead?
Why is this shot so long?
Because no one did look it in the eye. Not directly, at least.
Let me see if I can fix it. Move along. There you go.
But if it kills by looking people in the eye, why is it no one's dead?
Because no one did look it in the eye. Not directly, at least.
Ta-da. This is just amateurish. How does Lockhart get to the bottom so fast?
Ah!
Really quite filthy down here.
Especially when it then shows us how long it takes Harry and Ron to get down there. Moana showed us that it'd be funnier to hear Lockhart yell for much longer. This might just be me, but it bothers me that Tom's in the air handwriting is drastically different from his diary writing. I wish that they'd done what the book described and had Tom look kind of ghostly and get more solid looking as the scene progresses. And you know what could pull that off pretty easily? Animation. #anime Potter. Many have made this comment, but who designed Gryffindor's sword? It was made for Gryffindor, so I guess he was a dwarf? Or this is like his dagger? Or his wife's sword? Why is it so tiny? It doesn't really have a description for this to be contradictory to, but you could have gone off of it's a sword made for an adult. Let's do a montage of all of Ginny's lines in this movie, just for the fun of it.
Mummy, have you seen my jumper?
Leave him alone.
Harry, it was me. I swear, I didn't mean to. Riddle made me. And, Harry, you're hurt.
That didn't take long. She's not exactly a chatterbox in the movie, but dang. Dobby sounds like Beaker. This moment is so silly when it cuts to how close Lucius is to Harry. Who the heck is this chick?
Thanks.
Man, it takes Harry a while to say this line. Speed up.
There's no Hogwarts without you, Hagrid.
I'd just like to say thanks.
There's no Hogwarts without you, Hagrid.
Can't believe this movie ends on a build clap. One last thing, I swear. This is something that kind of bothers me in a lot of fantasy movies, but it's a little extra in this movie. It's these things. They look cool. I'd love to have a mansion with these features. But the thing about them is, I could have a mansion with these features. They don't look magical. They look mechanical, like something that could be in Uncharted or Indiana Jones or The Goonies. They are mechanical, obviously. Muggles had to build them, but they look mechanical, and that has always taken me out of it a little bit. Okay, that's plenty of complaining. I'm done now. I really didn't expect this one to be this complainy. Just wait until Goblet of Fire. That'll be real bad. But I have to complain about Rodgers and Hammerstein first. I'll see you next time if you subscribe. Bye.